We all live in our own bubbles, and those who were lucky enough to be born and grew up in the sort of polite society tend to assume people are overall well-meaning and abide by the baseline morality. Even when we hear the news of terrible things committed, we tend to think it's just other people's story, happened somewhere far away, until we face the evil from the fellow human being ourselves. Today, I collected stories about evils committed by seemingly everyday people near us. Some could be considered cases of psychopath, but others show what we are capable of when there's nobody watching and when the situation allows, which I find more chilling. So, here are 7 allegedly true stories about evil people around us. As a disclaimer, some stories include elements of sexual harassment, homicide, and violence, so if you are sensitive, tread carefully. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by host, Anthony. One day when I was 6 kids, including myself from the kindergarten, gathered to explore an abandoned house in the neighborhood. The house really looked like a haunted place that I saw on television. I think we were all frankly scared, but even at that age, the peer pressure was high. Should one of us dare to step away, he or she was to be branded as the chicken by the rest. One of us then suggested to play hide and seek in the house. One was selected as the seeker while rest 5 of us scattered around to hide. It was spooky. But with the bright daylight flooding in, it wasn't too scary. That was until one of us screamed. You know what happens. Everybody else also panicked and screamed. We all ran out and ran straight back home. It was later that evening that I got a call from the mother of one of the gang that her son didn't come home. The missing boy was found the following morning inside that spooky house. Apparently, he hid himself in the wardrobe there for hide and seek, and somebody locked the wardrobe from the outside. The poor boy was left stuck inside all night long. He never fully recovered from the traumatic event, and we didn't see him in the kindergarten again. It was obviously a foul play, but since we were all little kids, parents didn't pursue to find out who did it. But I know. You got away with it, but I know it was you. It was you who first suggested to visit the house, and it was you who suggested to play hide and seek there. Because the girl you fancied liked the poor boy instead. You had been bullying him already, hadn't you? Pushing him off the seesaw and slide. To think a 6-year-old could hold such a grudge and cunningly plot revenge is truly chilling. I have 2 little stories to tell. First is what I myself experienced, and the second what my friend did. Now I work in a different field, but I actually majored in civil engineering and started my work as an engineer. My very first task was to rebuild a bridge damaged by a recent typhoon. The location was really out in nowhere, deep in the mountain. A container was brought in as our office space and accommodation. There we didn't even get proper TV signal. There was a little shop that wasn't even the level of a corner shop. They shamelessly charged the double of the listed price and sold stuffs well past their expiry date. But the other nearest supermarket was 30 minutes drive away. So the driveway up and down was winding and narrow, but at the time crowded with heavy trucks and construction vehicles because a lot of works were going on at the same time after the major typhoon. But what choice did we have? We had to eat and buy daily necessities. So I and my boss drove up and down that dangerous winding road in my little Matiz. I think they sold under the name of a Spark in other parts of the world. Basically, a lightest, cheapest car there was. One day we were on the way back after lunch and passed by a large truck at a sharp corner. Its swishing gust alone seemed to be able to blow my tiny car off the cliff. "Whoa, we'd disappear without a trace if we were hit by such a monster," I said.
"Well, time is money for them, so they speed like crazy no matter what,"
my boss said. "Isn't it too dangerous, though?"
"Do be careful. Out in nowhere like this, there's no police, no potential witness. A dead man tells no tale, as they say, you know."
Boss' serious tone gave me a chill. A few days later, it was to be the day to pour concrete, a critical point in the project. We went to fetch breakfast much earlier than usual in preparation for the big day. And on the way back, we witnessed a car crash site. A truck lost its front right wheel, and an SUV was halfway over the guardrail. The roof of the SUV was ripped off the halfway, and the driver was still sitting there, drenched in blood. His eyes were opened, but didn't seem to have focus, and his head kept bobbing up and down. The truck driver was just standing by his truck, smoking. It was the first car crash I've ever witnessed, and my heart jumped hard. "Don't we need to help the driver there?" I said.
"No, it can be even more dangerous to move him now, not knowing what we are doing. Just call the emergency,"
Boss said. I did as I was told, but still wondered. But, wouldn't have the truck driver already reported it? He seems to be waiting.
"What did I tell you before? He is no witness. Once the SUV driver passes away, truck driver's account becomes the only account. When you called the emergency, did they mention a team was dispatched already?"
No. They just said they will as soon as possible."
"See, that truck driver was waiting for the other driver to die first,"
my boss said. The second story is from my best friend. After entering university, he blew off all the money he had on parties, and to recover the damage, he got a part-time job as a paper boy. To deliver morning papers, the delivery had to start at the crack of the dawn. It was a hard job, but he was desperate enough to hang on to it. On the 7th day of the job, he was on his moped with a heavy pile of papers on the back. As he passed through a narrow lane of a residential area, he entered a section with no street light. Alarmed by the sudden darkness, he turned on the headlight. The first thing he saw was a terrifying face of an old woman. He panicked and lost control, and his moped crashed into a utility pole. He got around with an excruciating pain and found he broke his leg. Then he heard the sound of ripping something next to him. He turned to look what it was. The horrible-looking old woman he saw earlier was now ripping the protective cover of the morning paper bundle and loading them up on her cart. It's a true story. A woman was waiting for her commute metro train on the platform. But what was this? Whiff of stench? She looked around and found a homeless guy sleeping on the bench behind her. His hair and clothes seemed to have got stiff hard with ages of grime and dirt. God, how disgusting! The woman mumbled despite of herself, but she had to stop herself because the homeless suddenly opened his eyes. Woman turned away and pretended nothing happened. Soon the train arrived and she got on, and so did the homeless guy. The woman felt uncomfortable and moved away to a different cabin, but homeless followed. She tried to deny her anxiety, but when the guy followed her as she got off the train, she couldn't deny he was after her. When she speeded up her walk, the guy was clearly keeping up too. The woman jumped into a convenient store on the way. Please, help me! Somebody's following me! She asked for help.
Calm down, miss, and tell me what's going on,
the middle-aged shop owner said. A homeless guy has been following me from the town. The owner went out to the street pretending to have a smoke, and indeed saw a homeless-looking guy hid himself behind a lamp post.
I see a guy behind a lamp post. Tell you what, I'll get my car going at the back of the shop and give you a lift back home,
the owner suggested, and the woman graciously accepted his kind help. Finally home, she could put the scary day behind and went to bed. In the morning, she went out to go to work as usual, and right outside her door was the homeless guy. She tried to close the door, but the man put his foot in and pushed his way in. The terrified woman dropped on her knees and begged, I'm sorry, I was thoughtless. Please, I didn't mean to offend, please, I'm so sorry. She carried on begging and apologizing because she was afraid he might do something as soon as she stopped talking. It went on for a good few minutes, and all the while the homeless looked down on her with no expression. Seems like you know you offended me. I spent the whole night thinking how I was going to rip you into pieces. But since you seem to be so sorry... The man finally opened his mouth with a smirk on his lips. He continued, stroking on the woman's head. So, I won't kill you this time. Don't do that again, or else. No, absolutely I won't. I'm sorry. The homeless left. Woman could barely lock up the door, sneak under her duvet, and cried, hugging her knees. Then she realized something warm was dripping down on her face other than her tears. It was blood. The homeless guy had slashed her head as he stroked it. It was only days later that the woman found out the owner of the convenient store was found murdered. Apparently the homeless threatened the poor man to tell where the woman lived and killed him. It's the situation that dragged on from the spring last year to this summer. I own 4 convenient stores, all located in the prime corners near a big university. I know I was lucky that my parents could support me to start my business, but I'm also proud that I worked hard and smart to grow it to the current scale. I got married 2 years ago, and we still enjoy it like a honeymoon with no child yet. Since I had 4 stores, they were run by employees day to day, while I just oversaw the overall management. One day, the nighttime staff of the second store had to quit suddenly. I needed a new staff quickly and hired a 23-year-old girl. She said she came to Seoul for her university and wanted to earn her own expenses. I appreciated her spirit, and indeed she fulfilled her job well for the first month. At the end of each quarter, I usually throw a little staff dinner for all 4 stores. Nothing grand, just the usual pork belly barbecue and some drinks. Naturally, for the next staff dinner, this new staff also joined. She got a bit tipsy and nagged me to go for the second round. I normally don't do second round, but that evening was particularly fun, and I took her, another girl, and a guy to a beer hall. The new staff, though it was her idea to go for the second round, just sat there quietly, almost sulking. The other girl left after the first glass too, so I was about to call it the night, when this girl bursted into tears. I and the other guy's staff tried to calm her down, asking what was wrong. "Could I just talk to you, boss?" she said. Maybe it's my character or what, but I often end up playing a counselor of a sort for others. Actually, I got close to my wife that way too when we first met in the university. So I sent a male staff away and got the girl talk. Apparently, she lived with her boyfriend, a fellow uni student, and got pregnant. There wasn't much I could do, so I said some kind words to her emotional support, and she thanked me, calling me a real kind guy. A few days later, she called me to ask if she could take a few days off because she finally decided to end the pregnancy. I genuinely felt sorry for her and agreed. She then said she was a bit short for the operation and if I could lend her 200,000 won, about $150. I felt a bit taken aback to get such a request from a newbie staff who worked for me barely a month, but considering her situation, I agreed again and transferred the money. She returned to work 3 days later and thanked me many times. Frankly, I felt a bit proud that I could help her out. Then, a few days before she finished her second month at my store, I got a letter that I was sued. The girl sued me for child support and psychological damage. At first I thought it was a joke, but when she didn't turn up to work and didn't return my call either, I realized I was set up. I quickly hired a lawyer. I meant to fight for my case square and fair because I was innocent, but the lawyer's advice was not so straightforward. The phone calls with that damn girl was not recorded. The only solid proof was that I transferred money to her, and the intention of that could be speculated negatively on me. Also, the male staff who saw me and the girl together last on the night of the staff dinner, the girl already managed to have him to testify on her side. To make things worse, there were some recent high-profile cases of sexual exploitation, and the public opinion was hyper-alert about any case in the similar vein. Paternity test during pregnancy is illegal in Korea, so my tactic was to drag the procedure as long as possible till she gave birth to whoever's child. At first, I didn't tell my wife about the situation, but as the case dragged into autumn, wife naturally found out a big chunk of money paid to my lawyer, and I had to disclose everything. That was the biggest challenge for my marriage thus far. For 1 full month, we fought. She threatened to sue me for adultery, to divorce. But eventually, I managed to convince her that I was innocent. And since then, she became my biggest ally. Wife managed to track down and face the girl who'd been refusing to return my call or contact. She suspected the girl plotted this all with her boyfriend. It was also my wife who urged me to submit my sperm sample so that we can head start with a paternity test as soon as the girl gave birth to the baby. Meanwhile, my wife got pregnant, and our bond got even stronger against the common enemy. But in November came the news that made everything more complicated. The girl miscarried her baby. Now, paternity test was impossible, which would have been the clearest proof to my innocence. My lawyer said clear win was now unlikely and suggested to settle the case for the reasonable sum. I and wife got tired with the whole situation, and we started having quarrels again, probably because her own pregnancy unraveled her emotions. Then, I received the result from my DNA test that turned out to be my savior in more than one way. Turned out, I'm infertile. I found out how terrible and evil humans can be at the tender age of 12. My dad had a friend, Mr. Kim. He ran a small business in town and managed to accumulate certain wealth. I loved to take my dad along when he visited Mr. Kim. His house was behind a stretch of well-manicured green lawn. Mr. and Mrs. Kim were both handsome people and also very friendly. They were well-liked and respected among neighbors. They had 2 sons, the older 19 and the younger a few years older than I. And they both treated me like their own little brother. They would take me to a game arcade or give me a ride at the back of their bike around the town. I don't have brothers or sisters, and they really felt like formidable older brothers. My childish mind sometimes sincerely wished that I really was Mr. Kim's youngest son. Then, one winter day, Dad got a call. His silent reaction to the call felt unusually heavy. He soon made a few more calls with that somber face and went out. He didn't come home that night. When he came home the following evening, he was with some of his closest friends, all of them with a heavy, serious face. Dad handed me some pocket money and told me to go out and play till dinner, but I was so curious of what was going on that I sneaked behind and eavesdropped adults' talk. Apparently, Mr. and Mrs. Kim were robbed and killed. The case was still under investigation, but from their tone, I could sense they already knew who the culprit was. I couldn't believe the shocking news. Who would do such a thing? How could the well-loved, solid guy as Mr. Kim meet such a terrible end? I prayed that it was all false, but indeed, the primetime news that evening reported the double murder case. It was only some time later that I could learn the whole scope of the terrible event. Mrs. Kim was found on the way from kitchen to her room, and Mr. Kim in his bedroom, both bearing dozens of stab wounds. The perpetrator clearly entered by breaking the glass to the front door. Some cash and Mrs. Kim's jewelry were missing, but there was something too clumsy to conclude the robbery was the goal of the break-in. Both of their sons were not home that night, each claiming to have stayed at their respective friends'. But while the youngest alibi could easily be backed by his friends and friends' parents, the older son's was unclear. Police then noticed cuts and scratches about his wrist, and further inspection also revealed scratch wounds at his ankle, clearly from human nails. Under police interrogation, the older son finally confessed that he killed his parents. He recently met a girl and wanted to marry her. Being just 19, he of course had no means to start a family, and Mr. and Mrs. Kim refused to support. Their arguments and quarrels got only more intense over the days leading into that night of the murder. He thought he would gain the inheritance and freedom by killing his parents. As he broke the glass of the front door, he got scratches around his wrist. His mom came out to check for the noise, and he first stabbed his mom multiple times, while she, desperately struggling to stop him going over to the master bedroom where Mr. Kim was asleep, by holding onto his ankle. But in return, he finished her off with a last blow to her throat. Mr. Kim was drunk and deep in a sleep that evening and couldn't even resist while his own son stabbed him 40 or so times. I remember one peaceful afternoon. Mr. Kim's older son gave me a ride on his bike, and he asked me a question.
Hey, Seungyeon, do you like your parents? I mean, really?
It's from 6 years ago. The scariest moment in my life. I had two very close friends, Mingyu and Seungil. We trio were inseparable since back in middle school. We just had SAT then, and were enjoying the free time and fooling around. One day we ended up in Mingyu's room, who lived by himself, to watch some porn together. I don't know how it started because I was rather more focusing on the video, but Mingyu and Seungil started arguing. It wasn't uncommon to see them tit for tat occasionally, but that day it got hotter than usual. Normally puffing away smoke together settled such a situation, so I went out to the corner shop to buy a pack of cigarette. But when I came back, all hell already broke out. Mingyu hit Seungil in the eye with a bottle, and Seungil was on the floor screaming like a madman, covering his eye. Seungil stayed in hospital for months and came out blind in one eye. The case was brought to the court, and their parents fought a dogfight there. Then one day Mingyu came to Seungil, dropped on his knees and begged for forgiveness. Frankly, I would have slapped his face and shouted, "Go to hell," if I was Seungil. But Seungil accepted his apology. His face then had such an indescribable expression, like I had never seen from him before. So we three got together and mingled around as before, except I occasionally noticed the glimpse of this weird expression on Seungil's face. I just assumed that might be because his eye. About a month passed. Seungil suggested to go to Mingyu's room. We were a bit uncomfortable because that's where it all happened, but in the end agreed. As before, we played some game, watched some porn. Then Seungil suggested we needed some drink, that he had been sober since his operation. So we sat down with some bottles. As we got slowly drunk, Mingyu once again apologized to Seungil with the tears. and such high emotions drove us drink more till we all passed out. What woke me up was a scream. I was still so drunk, and it felt like it was in a dream. But when I opened my eyes, what was happening there was more horrible than the worst nightmare. Sung-il was stabbing Mingyu in the eye with a chopstick. No, the chopstick was already stuck deep in Mingyu's eye. My heart stopped. My mind screamed to run away, but I couldn't speak or move. I couldn't even close my eyes. I just watched on. The horror. When Mingyu's scream abruptly stopped, Sung-il turned his head towards me, and our eyes met. I couldn't even breathe. Sung-il looked around, picked up the key ring, grabbed it in his fist like a knuckle spike. "You twat son of a bitch!" he shouted and jumped on me. The sharp key poked and scratched my head, and I barely covered my face. What saved the worst was the landlord banging on the door, who was alerted by Mingyu's and my scream. I heard Sung-il rushing out, but I couldn't even look up at him running away because I was afraid he might turn back and give the last blow in my eye. I had to get some stitches in my head, but Mingyu lost an eye. Sung-il was arrested the following day. Later, I got to learn Sung-il kept a diary ever since he lost an eye, putting down all the details of how to kill Mingyu and I. I heard Sung-il is soon to be released, and I'm scared. It's a story a teacher recounted in school. His hometown was not far from a nearby city, but his neighborhood itself was still more or less like a countryside village. Among the neighbors was a 20-something-year-old woman who was a bit mentally challenged. She looked perfectly normal, but her mind seemed to stuck in her childhood. She was still rather pretty and good-natured, so her parents seek to arrange the marriage with a guy with a disability too. But then her behavior changed from when, and her belly started swelling. Yes, she was pregnant. Her family was shocked and asked the young woman, but her incoherent mind failed to remember what really happened. They suspected the fiancé, but he strongly denied too. Usually in such a case, they would have chosen to end the pregnancy, but they were so convinced that her fiancé was the father, and because a paternity test would be possible only when the baby was born, the family let the woman have the baby. But when the baby was born and the test was taken, the fiancé was not the father. Desperate family created a little stir in the village by asking the neighbors for a hair or spit sample in effort to track down the culprit. But none of theirs matched. It was the woman's mother who also discreetly submitted samples from her own family too. And it turned out the father of the baby was the woman's grandfather. And that wasn't even the end of the shock and scandal. Apparently, the old man was initially very enthusiastic about collecting samples from the village guys because he knew one of them should be the father of the baby. He had been pimping out his own granddaughter to the guys in the village. He himself also took an advantage of his imbecile granddaughter, but he assumed he should be too old to father a baby, especially among all the other guys. My teacher doesn't know what exactly happened afterwards. It didn't seem that the family pursued any legal action against their own patriarch, and they just moved away, while equally guilty villagers chose not to talk about it at all. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, though frankly it was a pretty dark episode that takes away our trust for fellow human beings. It's been debated whether humans are inherently good or evil already from the ancient time. Do you have any opinion about that? I personally think the reality sits somewhere in between. Most people don't actively look to become an evil or harm others, but we are definitely capable. And the stages to reach there can be surprisingly brief. What do you think? If you enjoyed my work, please give it a thumbs up and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. My channel is all about spooky, scary, or bizarre stories fresh from Korean web communities. Whether you are interested in Korean culture or simply enjoy these type of stories, you'll have fun on my channel. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account, or there's Super Thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Until next Sunday, hopefully with a bit brighter subject, stay safe and take care.